Gentlemen, you are both drunk on cosmic wine.
Welcome to the show. I'm Dr. Mark Sylvester.
And I'm Dr. Richard Schulman. This is Alt Psych.
Well, she has spoken and we are here.
As usual.
We got a fun topic today, two of them.
The kind of topic that burns me up.
It really does chafe my, oh yeah. But first, before we go there, please give us our moment of Zen. I mean, our mental wealth tip of the day.
In order to do this, I bring out Led Zeppelin.
Okay, well, I counter your Led Zeppelin.
with a Pink Floyd. And I counter your Pink Floyd with the Who.
We're basically doing a lot of product placement here. I want to
not for our products though. Hey, look, here's the mental wealth tip of the day, as I'm sure Led Zeppelin will tell you, and Pink Floyd, and probably more the Who than anyone else. If you have a persistent wish for someone to stick up for you, then that's a message that you need to learn to stick up for yourself. And that's the mental wealth tip of the day.
I like it. Short, sweet, to the bone.
And we stuck up for ourselves.
Indeed, indubitably doobly.
Okay.
We're going to be talking about two fire starting concepts: pyrokinesis and spontaneous. I left out the human in the title because, we don't want to get canceled before we get started, but spontaneous combustion.
Well, I know some people who sort of spontaneously combusted emotionally, but you're not talking about that, are you?
No. That's a little hotter. This is just normal fire.
Okay. All right.
But it's really kind of a fun topic. It's a fascinating topic, fun to research. Pyrokinesis always makes me think of a couple good movies, but it's been in a lot of good shows. I think there was some X-Files touched on it. Carrie, right? Wasn't she pyrokinetic?
Wasn't there a movie called Firestarter? I don't know.
Well, so that's what I'm confusing. Definitely Firestarter. That was Stephen King in 1980. But Carrie also started fires with her mind, did she not?
Yes, absolutely. And by the way, it does occur to me, as one science fiction geek to another, how often non-ordinary mind goes right into science fiction that we've loved throughout the years. I wonder if that's a coincidence.
I think not.
Me neither. No wonder we were so connected to sci-fi.
Well, I think sci-fi, challenges people's imagination and thoughts and understandings, kind of the way that we're trying to do too.
Well, imagine people surprised when they find out that sci-fi is giving them a message of what could be or what is under the surface.
Well, let's start some fires right now. I mean, let's just get a definition out of the way. I kind of feel like everyone knows, but we just sort of defined it. But technically, pyro, the Greek from pyr, I think, means fire, and kinesis is movement. So, the definition would be moving fire with your mind, or in this case, being able to create and control fire with one's mind, purportedly through a psychic ability. Been around a long time. I saw literature dating back to the 1600s, which is pretty good. Stephen King was very fascinating. I think I'm blanking if he did Carrie. I didn't see that pop up.
He did. I think he did.
He did. So maybe Firestarter was the prequel.
If he didn't, he should have.
Definitely. It's right up his alley.
And he's right down the block. I think he's over in Casey Key.
Yeah, he is. Almost ran him over with my car. Thank God I dodged that lawsuit. But there've been some mostly magicians, I think, who can do this on command. There was a famous musician, or did I say musician?
No, I think you said magician.
There was a famous magician in the 19th century who put on a really great show, and no one could ever figure out how he was able to do this. One scientist suggested he must have had like pieces of phosphorus or something in his hand, and then through friction or the sweaty palms or breathing on it, poof, he could ignite the phosphorus and have fire in his hand. Though that no one
Yeah,
ever really.
leave it to science to screw up a good magic trick, huh?
Well, it's a possible explanation for it. But
Arthur C. Clarke, man, any advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic.
But the guy
So
wasn't
anyway,
a magician. So the people were like, well, this must be a magic trick. And it's through that and an inability to explain it that it's still an unexplained phenomenon.
True.
Certain mediums have claimed to have been able to do this. Fire handlers, fire breathers, sometimes they would do juggling tricks or sometimes take a lump of coal. So some people were caught doing this as a magician. Other people, it's been really kind of interestingly unexplained. There was and fairly recently, I saw an article researching, I think it was from 2011, a little girl in the Philippines, which, they're a culture with a little more mysticism and folklore, but still it gained worldwide media attention because it was thought that she could predict fires. That was the way the media explained it. Like she would say, fire, pillow, and then the pillow would burst into flames. So some people thought it was a type of precognition. Other people thought it was pyrokinesis because she would have no physical contact with it. So that makes the phosphorus and some of those other explanations a little more peculiar, a little harder to explain. But a pastor investigated that. They didn't feel there was a paranormal, although that by definition is paranormal, but they didn't feel that she was possessed or anything like that. They ultimately concluded that she must have inherited the powers from a previous life, which I found was interesting.
It's a very convenient explanation.
Yeah, that's the best alibi, I guess. But they did a show on it in 2020, and I think it was, it must have been during the pandemic. But a lot of people didn't pay attention because they were paying attention to other things. But it's still out there. I think it was called Kapuso Mo or something like that. It had a very odd name. I'm sure that's Philippine for something really cool, like fire starter. Have you ever started a fire with your mind?
Not a physical fire, but many other ones, yes.
I went to middle school with a girl who claimed to do that, which I thought was interesting.
Well, I guess people can claim all kinds of things.
True.
Did she ever when she get mad, like give somebody a blister or something?
So that's what happened with Carrie, right? Carrie, when she got mad, she was shooting fireballs, and then she learned to control it and then use her evil powers for evil. It's great.
She was just a wounded kid. Come on.
I don't remember how that movie ended. I don't think it had a happy ending.
They rarely do in Stephen King's world.
I just remember the album cover, the DVD cover, whatever you want to call it. It shows her in the red dress, and I just got blood all down her face.
Yeah, that's all I remember too. I don't remember the ending. I just remember the cover to the DVD. That's right.
Was Firestarter Drew Barrymore?
Yes.
Yeah. I can't remember Carrie. It might have been. We'll have to fact check that. Someone fact check that. Wait, I'm being told that nobody's here.
There are no independent fact checkers anyway.
Oh, okay. Well, that's why we live in our imagination and on the frontier of discovery.
Non-ordinary mind.
That's, to me, more interesting from a non-ordinary state, because hypothetically, if you could do this, you're channeling some sort of energy source to start the ignition. The fire might be self-sustaining, but just like a match, you'd have to start the first incendiary flick, with your mind, because there's no physical contact. And that's
Right.
very different than combustion, right?
Well, I
They,
mean, I'm not a physicist, but yeah, I would have to say yes.
well, the combustion case is a lot, to me, it's a lot more intriguing. There's been a lot more cases, a lot more rigorous scientific investigation of it, because although it's extremely rare, it is well documented. There's been tons and tons of these cases where people are found. And I wanted to do pictures, but I'm thinking, you know what, we're probably already pushing the envelope with the
Yeah.
topic. But please pause it, look at it afterwards, just Google, and some of the classic images come up, and basically what you're going to see is what's left of a body. Usually the only thing remaining is just ankles or just above the knees, sometimes one leg, and the rest of the body is completely turned to ash. Like, imagine all the coals in the fireplace completely burned down to white, gray ash. Sometimes there'll be a black outline of the skeleton. I've seen that, but it's usually completely burned up, which is very peculiar based on the leading theories, because even in crematoriums, they really have to add external heat for a long time. I think at least 12 hours, very, very hot. And even then, there's a lot of remnants, not only of course, implants and teeth, and some of the more difficult to burn down to nothing bones. And then the bones are actually ground up to match the powder, the ash that's left. So it's very peculiar how a fire could get that hot. And there's my favorite part: the newspaper sitting right next isn't singed. So it's totally self-contained and somehow doesn't start the building on fire or the items around it.
That is very bizarre.
The pictures are very bizarre. That's why I want everyone to look at them, because you never forget them. They're eerie.
Well, that's why we're talking about non-ordinary mind. Yeah, I mean, have you said that they have rarely studied pyrokinesis, but they have studied or they have documented the spontaneous combustion.
Yeah,
I wonder how you would study is like anyone who can do telekinesis out there, raise my hand. Is that, you know,
yeah,
light my
yeah. That's why it's
fire?
harder to bring pyrokinesis into a lab, because there's no physical evidence. Whereas with combustion, spontaneous combustion, you basically have a, I mean, I don't know if you want to call it a crime scene, but you have a scene, you have
I
a what's
see.
left of a body, and no real explanation. So
With
it's part of the ME's investigation, and then other scientists have really looked into this as possible um, explanations. Like, there's one called a wick theory, which was probably one of the most popular, which is basically like, we're mostly made of water, but after water, we've got a lot of fat. Fat is very similar to wax. And in theory, if you could light a human body like a peanut or a candle, it would slowly burn down. But again, what I said about the heat thing, if that were true, a candle takes a long time to burn. It does burn completely because it doesn't have bones and other teeth and other things in there that are hard to burn. But how does it get hot enough to actually cook bones and teeth better than a crematorium, which is a controlled, pressurized, intentional type of degradation via el fuego? I don't know.
I'm kind of bouncing back and forth between the two topics in my head. With pyrokinesis, has it ever been documented where they actually filmed somebody and said, okay, go ahead and do this now?
I couldn't
Or
find
is it
it.
just people saying, oh, that creepy little girl is, set fire to the house, and, they're looking for explanation why the house burned down, and they blame like witch trials.
Well, that's why the case in the Philippines to me was the most notable, because it was so recent, and literally the movie recreation or whatever was just released within the last couple of years. But people, supposedly people came from hundreds of miles to witness this girl. Um, they called her the fire seer because, again, they were thinking she was precognition visioning a fire, and then was going to that area and say, hey, that's going to be what starts. But I'm not clear if people actually watched her mentally start fires with her mind, or saw her say the fire is going to start, and then at some point later um, the fire started. My understanding was she did this several times with several objects around the house, and people flocked, hundreds and hundreds of people flocked from all over to learn the circumstances, and um, visit the house to investigate and stuff like that. So it was truly paranormal, and it's usually associated with fire breathing, fire walking. But to me, pyrokinesis is unique and special, and that it's a non-ordinary. It would have to be a non-ordinary state, and
Well,
it wasn't.
it would have to be a true mind over matter, where you're literally changing physical matter with
Yeah.
concentrated thought. I mean, I guess it would be possible if you had some kind of amplifier, because it's just energy, electricity, and but I have no idea how that would happen.
I'm pretty sure in the popular TV series Heroes, which has been a few years back now, I'm pretty sure one of the heroes had this ability and would focus on a molecular level, kind of like a microwave, and speed up molecules until they reached a flashpoint. So, like I said, if you could mentally light that match, it's very easy. That's maybe a leap, but it's very easy to explain how the fire would start at a certain location and then continue to self-sustain, because the fuel is matter.
It would
But
have to be it would have to be a starter, rather, it wouldn't be the fire coming from the human being. It would that would be the ignition.
yeah, and which we know that is it really that much of a leap? We know microwaves, like Arthur C. Clarke said, microwaves certainly would have seemed like magic to cavemen. You put this stuff in this magic box, and you beep beep a couple seconds, and it comes out. You could catch something on fire very quickly. I catch all kinds of things on fire in my microwave. I'm very good at it, like popcorn, for instance.
Yeah.
So
Well,
that would look
any
like magic.
well, even if you go back 50 years, wireless technology would be fairly magical. Or even this Zoom call that we're making right now,
Certainly.
video conferencing seem like the Jetsons or something.
So take it one step further. We know that the brain, similar to microwaves, operates on, we have brain waves, right? And there's different brain states. So not that far of a leap to figure out, maybe our brain waves could be focused, targeted, similar to microwaves, on an object, and poof, you got a great Stephen King flick in real life.
There you go. There you go.
So what's interesting about her is, unlike the magicians who had something in their hand that they could manipulate and combust, she touched nothing, and supposedly people had witnessed that. But there's been many cases like that, but not as rigorously investigated as the human combustion. And the human combustion fascinates me for the reasons we've talked about so far: the wick theory, the ability for the body to even spontaneously combust, although that's debated. For a while in the early investigations, alcohol was almost always involved.
For the investigator or the person who burned up?
Probably both, but no, that there was alcohol in the victim's system, and it was thought, okay, well, this upset the physiology, so made the body more combustible, and there must have been an external source. That was later debunked, which was kind of interesting, because that seemed like a reasonable hypothesis. It doesn't explain why items near the body don't even get singed or burnt. Something as fragile as paper. sitting right next to something that cooked a body down to dust. Very,
Well,
very interesting. And
well,
it's not based on the victim's will, like pyrokinesis.
well, once again, we're starting to go down. I think we're starting to go down a much bigger rabbit hole than we intended at the beginning. And this has nothing to necessarily to do with spontaneous combustion, except when you go to the wildfires in California a couple of years ago, there would be one house got burned down, one tree the tree right next to it was not even
Mhm.
singed. The next house is perfectly fine. And it almost like it had a pattern. Fire, I assume there's lots of science around it, but there are phenomena that don't make any sense. And I guess that's where we come in, huh?
Yeah, and I mean, you think about the amount of energy that a physical body has, it is tremendous. There's a tremendous amount of stored energy. We've built it up our entire life as we grow and consume food 3 times a day. Anyone who's done the 5th grade experiment where they ignite a peanut in a little styrofoam cup, which you call a calorimeter, right? To see how it raises 1 milliliter of water per degree Celsius, you can actually measure the amount of energy, and that's just a tiny little peanut. And we're sort of big peanuts. So if you're going to cook a body, it has a lot of energy and fuel to burn it. But for a long time, it was thought, you know what happened? This person died. They were drunk or drinking heavily. They had high blood alcohol, which may have made it an easier ignition source. They died suddenly of a stroke or a heart attack or an arrhythmia or whatever. And they probably had a cigarette in their hand, and then it fell on them. And the conditions were perfectly right, almost like a stoichiometric ratio for combustion, that it actually ignited the big peanut, or in this case, victim.
Yeah,
But
but it wouldn't explain why the bones were turned to ash when modern crematoria won't do that.
yeah, it doesn't explain that. It doesn't explain how it doesn't burn the whole joint down. A lot
Yeah,
of times, the only
go
thing,
figure, I've missed that.
there are people that are found in their lazy boys, their cloth lazy boys, and the cloth lazy boy hasn't even been burned up, but there's nothing left. There's just powder and an ankle.
That's pretty impressive. So when do we blame like aliens or directed energy weapons? We don't have that yet
Let's
in
always blame aliens.
okay.
I mean, directed energy weapons. The thing is, this has been in the literature long before we had technology. The matter of fact, I think it was named in the 1700s by a British cat whose name escapes me. The British have actually, there was one guy, see if I have him. Oh, this was a Professor Ford. I don't remember what year this was, but he really, really wanted to figure out, he was really bothered by this, and he really wanted to tackle
why
the burning issue. So he got like a big belly pork and tried to ignite this thing, tried soaking it in alcohol, tried to recreate the conditions. And he actually discovered a very interesting thing. And this is what shot the biggest hole in the alcohol theory. He couldn't get the thing to ignite. He had hold a blowtorch to it. He soaked it in alcohol for days. And he could never recreate that. And what he discovered is that basically acetone was a far more likely ignition source. And if you think about when you drink alcohol, there's several toxic metabolites of alcohol, acetaldehyde. One of them is acetone. And acetone is a normal cellular waste product. If we drew our blood right now, we do have acetone in our blood, but it's a poison, and we quickly get rid of it and detoxify it and everything. But he recreated the experiment and soaked the thing in acetone. And then, of course, needless to say, it was enough to ignite the tissue, which then followed the wick theory. And it opened it up to the explanation of the cases where no alcohol was involved. But there was always interesting phenomenon going on, acetone would be present. So if you're drinking a lot of alcohol, acetone's present. If you're in ketosis, let's say you're a diabetic, acetone's present. If you do a fat-free diet, you'll get higher levels of acetone. Diabetes, obviously. So a lot of these people were diabetic, or could be explained by the acetone better than ethanol marinating. And it kind of changed the way that people plausibly could explain, this is the first real time human combustion kind of had been experimentally demonstrated. And at least a hypothesis, scientific hypothesis put forth, which I thought was really interesting. Of course, there are other fun explanations.
Such as?
Ghosts.
Oh, ghosts, of course. We've heard about ghosts.
There are supposed ghosts that, almost like when you have a spirit orb, and as it's changing shape from a circle into this smoky ectoplasm. In some cases, people have claimed to have observed blue flames at that point. And so like a low heat, blue is very cold for fire, but this low heat flame floating, almost like ball lightning. And in some cases, actually starting fires. If you get a vengeful pyro ghost, I mean, if you're a pyro in life, why would you not be a pyro in death?
Well, the thing that, as we go into this non-ordinary, it's almost like a non-ordinary reality rather than just non-ordinary mind. It sort of boggles my mind. Okay, so people can spontaneously combust. Why doesn't the chair get singed? That's I think a pretty interesting conundrum, that defies, on Dark Journalist, a show I watch sometimes, they talk about something called an apotheum. I think it's called an apotheum effect, where the normal laws of physics don't apply. This feels like one of them. Unless, the chair is, even if it was made of asbestos, which I guess they don't allow that, anymore, because it gives you lung cancer or something. Wouldn't you see some kind of burn mark on it? I mean, even in the best.
I mean, there's usually a burn mark, but the fact that the chair is not completely burned up, but a body is really, I mean, that's why I encourage people to look at the pictures, because the pictures, could they have been doctored in the 1930s? Unlikely. Could they be now? Definitely. But most of these cases were 30s, 40s, 50s, when they were really investigating that and taking it seriously. And now it seems like, well, this person died of this, that, or the other thing. Back then, it would really chafe the ME, the coroner's, I think, faith a little bit. Like, we've got to find the cause of fire investigators.
Of course, nowadays the cause of death would be COVID-19, so we wouldn't worry about that.
Probably. I'm assuming the virus could set you on fire too. I'm looking at some pictures right now.
You don't look happy.
They're disturbing. They're eerie. There's a case of a woman who actually died on the toilet, an old lady, and her walker sitting right there. And I cannot see any remains. There's just powder, maybe some black ash a little bit. Most of the cases, people were sitting when it happened, which I've noticed that, but I haven't seen anything in the literature about that. To me, I think that might be significant. The woman on the toilet, most people are in lazy boys or on couches, right? And what the eeriest part is, what remains is usually an ankle or a leg, sometimes two legs above the knee, sometimes below the knee. It's almost as if we were a wick, it's almost as if something snuffed it out at that point. But again, the toilet paper isn't singed, the newspaper isn't singed. And I think that's what kind of, like you said, there's so many layers of fascination here, which all of these theories and hypotheses fail to explain all of that. The wallpaper doesn't catch on fire. I mean, we don't have wallpaper anymore, but back then they did. See, if I'm looking at it right now, and it's going to make people be like, oh, I want to see what he's looking at. And then they'll go Google it. There's
just
one case of someone that looks like they might have been lying down. But
just
most
seems
of them,
like
they're sitting.
it just seems like, you know, there's so much more. Excuse me for a second. There's so much more that hasn't been explained by our science, which seems to have taken almost a religious preoccupation with the masses, you know. And science trying to explain this is, you know, under the heading of, it's a mystery, isn't it?
How does that
Which I
happen?
think a
It
lot.
just
I think
does.
a lot of stuff is. Excuse me. There we go. My audio went bonkers.
There was an article in 1823 in a book published by a dead white guy. And back then, what he thought was all these cases had similar things in common. One, like I said, the victims were consuming alcohol, high levels of alcohol. They usually were chronic alcoholics. Like I said, that later was debunked, but it was an early observation because alcohol would increase acetone and other flammable organic solvents, metabolites. Most of the victims were actually female, which I think is still true, which I think I researched this a long time ago and I didn't find it this time, but my memory was the thought that female have more water content and therefore they're like interstitial space, their makeup cellularly and extracellularly in this case. If you have acetone, it could travel around better. It's more freely liberated. Whereas men, you know, we're just thick, gristly dunces with thick skulls.
I agree.
A lot of times he thought there was an ignition source. So cigarette butts may have been found. So, or even a candle, I think in one case. The hand, it's gross, but the hands and the feet usually fall off. Hands are usually consumed. Feet almost always aren't, which I find bizarre. I think maybe
as if the whole thing isn't bizarre, man.
Yeah, that's why it's such a great topic. I love talking about it and thinking about it because it's not a solvable puzzle. Again, he noticed way back then, and I think that term came from the 1740s. This is almost 100 years later. He noticed that there was very little damage to the surrounding, the ceiling, the walls, the newspapers, toilet papers, whatever. It had a very peculiar odor. You know, I don't have a lot of experience smelling burned bodies, but people who work at crematoriums do. People have been in, you know, horrible places where bodies have been burned and mass graves. The entire town will smell like burnt hair, burnt flesh. It has a very signature smell. What he noticed was this was different. Their bodies actually had a very offensive odor, not like burnt hair isn't offensive, but it was different. And the residue left behind was very greasy and oily. And then it had these real fetid ashes. I don't know how else to describe it. Sometimes black, like you would expect, but usually white and light gray ashes are all that's left.
I don't know exactly where to go with this. It seems to me,
I do. I'll keep going down the rabbit hole.
You know, it seems to me that, you know, when we talk about a lot of other things in this non-ordinary mind thing, the principle is that we can know more about the mystery of human consciousness. Well, I guess this could be too, if it could be used productively. I mean, I've read reports of monks living in frigid conditions who learned how to control their body heat so they could go out and stay warm. My mentor, who was a Navy SEAL, He could go out on a freezing day wearing shorts and a t-shirt and it didn't bother him. The idea that human beings can generate heat is not unknown to me. That kind of heat, well, maybe not.
Well, I mean, again, is it that? Have you ever seen how quickly a child can spike a fever? You ever seen how quickly an infection can, some people with myositis or pericarditis, you can put your hand, certainly in pneumonia, you can put your hand over and feel locally in the tissue. We think of fever as being everywhere. No, the tissue can get really red, really hot. And one natural explanation is that whatever creates that heat, whether that's locally, right? Because our brainstem controls our overall body temperature set point. And you get immune signals to the brain to raise the body temperature to slow down the enzymes and therefore the infection. But locally, you get a lot of heat. And that has to do with cellular metabolism in the area. And kids do it much better than adults. So is it
and I've seen, I mean, I've felt people working on me who very talented healers whose hands would get very warm. That I could feel the change in temperature in their hands. There's all kinds of biofeedback kind of experiments where we could either raise or lower temperature in our hands, all kinds of other physical indicators. This seems to be a qualitative step beyond just, warming up my chest.
Yeah, but whatever, they call that the self-heating phase. So whatever increases the tissue's temperature, let's say, that's the initial force that's creating heat above and beyond what we would expect would cause a fire. And then it's thought that based on the acceleration of that heat, it creates something called thermal runaway, which is really more of a chemical explanation. You see that in exothermic reactions. And then finally, if they get hot enough, autoignition. Although again, most sources, there was some external heat source identified, whether that was a fire in the fireplace or a candle or a lamp. The old oil lamps, cigarettes are really typically thought because the person was a known smoker. But this type of heat, you don't really find cigarette butts. Maybe if a hand's left behind, I don't know, maybe it has a cigarette still in it.
Yeah, but once again, the cigarette should have burned other things too.
Yeah, nothing can explain that. And we talked about the wick effect, kind of just like, you can actually take a peanut and hold a lighter to it. You don't need to hold it very long, and that peanut will sit there and burn like a candle for a long time. It's pretty amazing. And then you get the right biochemical situation. It's obviously rare, but it's not so rare that you could write it off like the pyrokinesis type of thing, or poltergeist or ball lightning or any of the other stuff that we've talked about. You want to go further? You want to go further down the rabbit hole?
You got a shovel. Let's go.
I'm trying to find another dead white guy here who thought, I think his name was Larry Arnold, and he wrote a book where he coined the term for a pyrotron, which was thought to be a subatomic particle, going back to what I said about heroes, right?
Yeah.
And it was thought that the pyrotrons were on a molecular atomic level. I mean, those were what started that initial heating process that led to the runaway. And, maybe you can just make up something like that. But it was an interesting theory that there might be something on a molecular level that triggers a chain reaction. And that's why we can't kind of see it here in the macroscopic world. We think like macroscopic beasts because, well, we are, among other things.
We are that. Yes, we are.
That one's kind of fun. Poltergeists, pyro ghosts, as I like to call them. That's kind of interesting There have been a number of people that have witnessed fires spontaneously starting without a person present. Obviously, the observers present, but without someone who claims to have pyrokinetic abilities, or obviously is a drunk, morbidly obese, diabetic woman, chronic smoker. The poltergeist theory is kind of interesting because there's been a number of cases about fires being started with in an abandoned house with nobody around, no ignition sources, no power.
Okay, it took me a little while to get my brain wrapped around this thing, but so here we go.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much. All right, you've heard of remote healing, right? Why not? I mean, if you're changing someone's physiology 3,000 miles away by looking at a picture of them or however they do it, I don't know how they do it, but something like that. Why not starting a fire?
Remote pyromania.
Well, the idea here is that if one, then why not the other? I have read many documented cases of remote healing, and people do it, and you pay people to do it. Interestingly enough, I had a patient we couldn't figure out, and when we found this medical intuitive, Mona Lisa Schultz was her name, up in Maine, and she was charging $500 an hour to do this, and she couldn't crack that case. Of course, our friend Adrian Borden got it on the first shot, so go figure.
I believe it.
But the idea here is that, okay, there are things about the mind that we don't understand. Maybe in the end, that's what non-ordinary mind is. Or is it mind? Is it brain, that's doing this kind of thing? We don't know, but I think we want to ask questions so people won't be stuck in their ordinary minds, because unfortunately, it's ordinary mind that got us in the mess that we're in as a society. And we want to expand who we are as real human beings, not the sort of suffocated version that we've been witnessing, for millennia, maybe certainly in all of my lifetime, which feels like millennia now. To expand into, okay, if somebody had the ability to start a fire, let's say, I'm not talking about combusting other human beings. I'm not taking this into a negative realm. But if you had the ability to start a fire, well, you could go to some pretty cold places and warm yourself.
Sure.
There are things that you could probably do with this if it were in control. Could you heat a home now? I mean, it brings up a lot of possibilities in terms of how we might live.
Well, and that offers a hypothetical but complete explanation of maybe, like you said, how monks can be frozen in a block for hours and still survive because they're internally controlling and generating their own heat.
And breathing too. The experiments at Menninger's Institute in the late 60s were that monks could slow down their breathing to 1 breath an hour, heart rate to 1 beat a minute, or maybe even less. So there are things, that obviously these are human beings with some unique ability, but we're all just human beings. Who knows? Maybe they've been practicing that since they were kids. I mean, I don't know.
Well,
in a way, I can see psychokinesis more easily than I can see spontaneous human combustion, even though there are more documented cases of the second one.
Well, the last big difference I was going to say between the two is pyrokinesis has not ever been legitimately taken by mainstream science, and spontaneous combustion really has. There was a case in 1980, not that long ago. It was in South Wales, and the MD, the medicine Western medicine trained man of science essentially contributed the cause of the fire to that wick effect of that particular
Wow.
body. In 2010, there was a guy in Ireland where the coroner documented on the death certificate this was a case of spontaneous human combustion. I mean, that, could you imagine your death certificate saying that? Well, I probably don't imagine as well when you're dead.
I think it would be more interesting than, than anything else.
That's why I think it's interesting that science has actually said, yes, this happens, but we don't know why.
Well, at least that's honest.
But it doesn't explain, like you said, how certain items are totally untouched. Sometimes there'll be a TV 10 feet away that's been melted and the newspaper sitting right next to them is unsinged. So
That's pretty interesting.
That's kind of that's the coup de grace of the comparison and contrasting of the two.
Ooh, some TVs I'd like to melt.
It'd be cool to, melt. Well, I guess that's pyrokinesis.
I guess it's the combination of the two, huh?
Well, now, what would it be called if you telepathically set someone else on fire? Is that spontaneous combustion or is that pyrokinesis?
It's a Bruce Springsteen song, isn't it?
Should be.
Whoa, I'm on fire.
Well, we didn't start the fire.
Oh, there you go. Fire and rain,
It's always been burning.
After the fire. The
Since
fire still burns. So it sounds like we've degenerated into rock and roll trivia here. So,
well, we got a lot of ideas for next week, but we're relying on the good folks of the interwebs to vote for their favorite topic.
Can't start a fire without a spark. This gun's for hire, even if we're just dancing in the dark. Or spontaneously combusting in the dark.
Are you going to have a fresh mental wealth tip for us next week? I'm kind of getting greedy, kind of getting hungry.
Dig this. I found a file on my computer with tons of them that I had been stockpiling before we even started the podcast.
All right.
So I will have, yes, freshly minted from many years ago that I thought I had forgotten about, and they're all raring to go.
Well, then we'll do it again next week. Same bad channel, same bad time.
1, 2,
until
3,
then,
4. Be well.
Be well. Be well.
That was pretty close. Not bad.
One day we'll get that. All right.
There are 4 lights.